Hello and welcome to Trust Television. This is Business Daily and we're coming to you live from the station's headquarters in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. I am your host, Christiana Amodu-Otinya. It's always a pleasure to have you join us on the program. Remember, on this program, we'll bring you factual and unparalleled analysis on major developments in the world of business, finance, investment, and basically what happens with the monetary and fiscal policies in the country. Now we'll begin with the headlines we have for you on the program. Today we'll begin from the oil and gas sector. NLNG force majeure. Nigerians may pay more for cooking gas. Also in exports, the NEPC boss restates commitment to economic diversification through exports. Now we'll give you more details on that in the business roundup segment of the program. We'll take a short breather. When we return, time to tell you whether the bulls or the bears are dominating the markets. Please stay. Welcome back. Let's get straight to updates from the stock market. We begin from Customs Street, talking about the local buzz in the country here in Nigeria. Now, we saw that the Nigerian market closed largely bearish. That's talking about the close yesterday. A lot of data around what's happening with economic data and also what's happening with interest rate. Experts have attributed that to what we are seeing happening on the Nigerian stock market. We saw the stock market shedding 2.16% in negative territory, and investors on the Nigerian bourse lost 544 billion naira as the Nigeria exchange closed southwards, finished trade southwards, of course. Now let's move over to other African bourses, talking about other stock exchanges and securities exchanges we monitor for you on the program. We go straight to Johannesburg, talking about Africa's largest securities exchange. That's the JSE, the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. And the JSE also closed largely lower, especially as investors monitoring domestically what's happening domestically in South Africa. Talking about what's happening with the power sector in South Africa. That's the power utility Eskom in South Africa has been embattled for some time. And we saw a very big kick. The president of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, wielding the big stick for South Africa, talking about cutting some of the controversial perks for ministers, cabinet ministers in South Africa, talking about the perks that comes with free supply of water and electricity. And that's the big news we saw coming in from South Africa. The JSE, as you can see on the board there, down 0.46%. The arrow there, you can see it's largely in red territory. Now going over to Ghana, what's happening in the Ghanaian Straits? The GSE is down, is unchanged largely, closed largely flat at 2,461. Also for Ghana, there's a lot of developments coming in from the fiscal front in Ghana. The Ghanaian cedi has been adjudged as the worst performing currency against the US dollar, tanking close to 45%. That's the news we saw coming from Africa, from the world's second largest cocoa producer, talking about Ghana. Especially as the Ghanaian government and the Ghanaian economic managers are also looking forward to getting $3 billion economic stimulus from the International Monetary Fund. Issues around debt sustainability have also come up to the table, talking about Ghana getting that amount from the IMF. Now let's go over to Wall Street, talking about the United States. What's the sentiment like in the US? Now we saw markets, all three major stock averages finished regular trade higher. Now it's a sea of green for the indexes, as you can see here from the United States. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 1.12%. The S&P 500 climbed 1.14%, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq climbed 0.90% to end at 10,772.40. That's talking about what's happening with the Nasdaq Composite. The markets, especially in the US and global markets, are focusing on what's happening with earnings report. We've had Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, and we also expect earnings declaration from Tesla and the big tech companies that are also listed in the US. So that's the focus largely for markets. The earnings reports have largely stayed positive, and that's shrugging concerns for, and that's also bringing about some concerns for the markets. Big corporates are focusing on what's happening. What will be the outlook for the US economy? What will be the outlook for a probable global recession? Going over to Europe now, the FTSE 100 okay, we have the Asian market here. Let's quickly dissect this now. The Nikkei 225 in Japan is up 0.37%. 0.7%. The Shanghai Composite in China shed 1.19%, and the Kospi in South Korea shed 0.56% at 2,237.44. Of course, the markets in Asia are following the developments coming in from Wall Street in the United States, talking about what's happening in the front of corporates, what's happening with earnings reports. That's the focus we are seeing for Asian equities. Also, issues around inflation, interest rates, and escalating recession risk. Okay, let's go to Europe. The FTSE 100 in the UK up 0.10%. The CAC 40 in France, as you can see there, up 0.24%. And the DAX, the German DAX, is up 0.06% at 12,773.78. One thing is peculiar now, which in the European street, the cost of living issues that have come up. We are seeing protests in France. Talking about the CAC 40 there is in France. Protests coming in around energy cost, around cost of living in major economies in Europe, and markets are also pricing in on this development. Let's go over to commodity markets and see what the prices are saying today. We'll begin, of course, from the international benchmark for crude oil. That's talking about Brent crude. Up 0.70%. Now we have three reds and 3 greens spread across, as you can see on the screen here. Now $90.66 for Brent crude. Of course, there's still a whole lot to be done, especially with Nigeria reaping the benefits from the oil market. For the bullion, talking about the yellow metal gold, down 0.74%, and we are seeing that for palm oil, wheat, and cocoa, we are seeing 2 greens and 1 red. Red there is coming from the cocoa market, down 1.50% at 2,305 per metric ton. Moving now to crypto watch. Let's watch what's happening in the crypto market. Bitcoin trading for $19,213, up 0.16%. Ethereum is up 0.04% there at $1,296.80. Now for the Binance coin, $107.91, up 0.17%. Now, we have seen the headline cryptocurrency talking about the Bitcoin. It has tanked more than 70% from the level it was this time last year to what we are seeing happening now. There's been a lot of whale movements also affecting the cryptocurrency market. And the golden rule for investment is always, don't invest in what you do not understand or what you do not know. Those are the numbers we have for you on the program today, talking about crunching numbers from stock markets across the world. Now, let's quickly take you through some major news stories in the business roundup. We begin from what's happening in the oil and gas sector. Now, the cover price of liquefied petroleum gas, also known as cooking gas, may soon spike across the country as the Nigeria liquefied natural gas, that's the NLNG Limited, declared force majeure in its 22.2 million tons per year Bonny LNG export facility. Experts have warned that the cost of filling a 12.5 kg cylinder of cooking gas in Nigeria may hit 12,000 naira or more by November, up from 9,800 as of October. Going into the export sector now, the Executive Secretary and Chief Executive, Nigeria Export Promotion Council, Dr. Ezra Yakusak, has said the council remain focused on realizing the economic objectives of the present administration in the area of economic diversification. He stressed that the mandate of the agency was to develop and promote non-oil exports in order to diversify the economy from a monolithic to a robust economy driven by non-oil sector. Now, he said the council's Export for Survival campaign, which he launched on assumption of office, represented a patriotic call for all Nigerians to realize the urgency of engaging in non-oil export trade as a viable means of economic growth, poverty alleviation, industrial development, and boosting Nigerians' foreign exchange earnings. Now, the focus of the program today, that's all we have for you for the business roundup. The focus of the program today would definitely be on the inflation figures we saw released by the National Bureau of Statistics, putting Nigeria's headline inflation at 20.77%. We will be delving into the issues that have come up for that figures. A lot has been said about the structural challenges that have been responsible for, of course, pushing inflation figures up. However, some experts have also opined that we might be seeing inflation hitting its tipping point, and we might see a decrease as the country enters into its harvest season, talking about farmers harvesting. But then again, there's a dent in that, have submerged farmlands across the country. My guest will be joining me for the discussion after this short break. He will be speaking to issues around inflation. I don't know if we'll have my guest with us now. He's joining us virtually from Kaduna. Okay, we're still working on bringing him up to join us for the discussion. Remember, it promises to be a packed program today, so stay tuned as we bring you more on Business Daily. Okay, I'm being told now that my guest is up now, but you'll get to see him shortly after this break. Please stay.
That's great. That's good to see you.
Nigerians, elections are here again. Let us shun violence. Let us play the game according to the rules. Do not be a thug. Say no to violence. Let's rise and defeat violence, crime, and sabotage against the peace of our nation. Nigeria is the only country we have. We must do everything to keep it united. We must avoid any act that promotes hate and disintegration. Say no to separatist movement, terrorism, fake news, hate speech, religious bigotry, and any act that tends to divide us as a nation. Watch out for strange gatherings and suspicious movements. Restrict access to sensitive documents and data, the disclosure of which may damage national security. Educate your staff and family, particularly on measures to safeguard information and report security breaches. Apply relevant legal security guidelines to protect yourself and your neighbors. Due to misinformation and wrong choices, some idle persons resort to vices in their greed to get rich quick. They resort to kidnapping, killings for rituals, and other heinous crimes. Avoid wrong use of the social media. Before you broadcast that false message, think twice. Ask whether it will promote peace or violence. For safety at home, still be security conscious. Educate your household on safety tips. Report all suspicious movements and persons to the security agencies nearest to you. Be a good citizen. Be patriotic. To pass security information, please call 0813-222-2105, 0915-339-1309, 0908-837-3514, or send a mail to dsspr@dss.gov.ng. This message is from the Department of State Services, DSS.
Welcome back, and thank you for still staying there with us on the program. If you're just tuning in, this is Business Daily coming to you from Trust Television. Of course, thank you for letting us into your homes and being on your screen. Now it's time to get into the conversation of today, and my guest is joining me virtually, Dr. Sambo Bello Ngawa. He's joining me from Kaduna State, and just like I mentioned earlier, the focal point for the program today will be on what's happening, especially in the front of inflation. We've seen also the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria try to do everything within its purview to curtail or control rising inflation in the country. But we have seen the recent numbers coming from the National Bureau of Statistics: 20.77% for headline inflation, core inflation 17.60%, and food inflation at 23.34%. So I am being joined now by Dr. Sambo Bello Ngawa. He's a principal consultant, Better Consultancy Services, and also a development economist. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Just before we get to your opening thoughts for the discussion, I want you to equally listen to these developments, especially in the bread, or should I say flour subsector, talking about how inflation is affecting that sector. Please take a listen.
In Katsina, over 250 bakeries have collapsed, while about 310 struggling to remain in the business as a result of the high cost of baking materials.
And the flour, which we used to buy like 12,000, 11,500 before, is now 27,500, almost to 28,000. The oil, which is the groundnut oil we used to do it, is almost 32,000 plus. Sugar is 30,000, 31,000 plus, I believe. These are, and other materials, even the firewood. So that's the reason why there is increment of prices in all the breads for now.
Here, only 3 staff remain out of 42, baking 3 bags of flour daily instead of 18 bags in the past. Even at that, they resorted to producing what they called chin-chin bread to meet the demand of the majority that cannot afford a loaf of bread. Why are you asking this kind of question? In any case, this is a business. If I cannot make profit, I have to have a rethink. I honestly pity the young chaps I sacked from this bakery. Bakers are not happy that the government has not shown concern for their plight, which forced many to produce below capacity and downsize the number of their staff. The industry is key to the sustenance of socio-economic well-being of the people of Katsina State, considering the number of people along the value chain. As a leader, if I tell you that I am happy with the closure of some bakeries, I am lying. I urge government to come to our aid. Describing the situation as worrisome, the national president of Association of Master Bakers and Caterers of Nigeria is appealing to government to give them a bailout to prevent the risk of total collapse of the industry.
We are in very serious, challenging situations. The situation is daunting because a lot of our members have shut down their bakeries. About 30 to 40, and it's 5% of our members nationwide have shut down the bakeries and are still counting. The situation is not encouraging at all.
Unless this is done quickly, observers are saying the future of the industry in Nigeria is bleak and poses threat to the fragile peace being enjoyed in some parts of the country.
Thank you for that. Now I'm just going to go directly to Dr. Sambo Bello-Ngawa, who is on standby. Now we're having issues around bakers out there. There's an outcry from bakers. The sector, just like we heard, that the sector is on the brink of collapsing, and inflation now doing 20.77%. Most times I ask the questions to experts on this program, what are your thoughts? And somehow it's becoming a little bit cliche to me, but then I have to ask again. Doctor, what are your thoughts on this rising number for inflation?
Thank you very much. Indeed, the discussions on inflation is a cliche. I agree with you. In fact, inflation in Nigeria, to my mind, has a long history of trajectory. But then, within the past decade or so, we have some immediate and remote causes. And then, of course, there are some other fundamental issues around inflation. But then when we talk of the bakery industry, actually, it's not just the bakery industry. The entire ecosystem that tantamount to the cost of living has been rising within the past few years. Of course, there are immediate factors. In terms of immediacy, and then the security situation in the country, and the Ukraine-Russia crisis, the flooding just lately, and just about anything seems to be a Nigerian inflationary situation. Now, analysts normally point out that this inflation problem is global. Yes, be that as it may, there are unique circumstances that affect different jurisdictions and different nations. In Nigeria, there are some immediate causes. There are, of course, some fundamental questions that need to be asked. But fundamentally, the entire consumer sector actually is faced with this devastating inflation. Some, in fact, even more so than even the bakery sector. So let's begin to decompose the issue. Let's begin to look at it and begin to decompose. Fundamentally, there is a fundamental problem of alignment, misalignment, I may say, monetary policies and the fiscal policy and behaviors. That has been the big elephant in the room. I'll come back to that. But the immediate thing that you will notice is the fact that the imported inflation from imports and the fact that production value chains have been disrupted by COVID and insecurity, and other logistical problems. And just lately also, the flooding situation that we have had through the rainy season. So these have compounded over time to really bring about this. That's why it's not surprising. The runaway inflation on the food sector is most devastating. But the implication of that is that Nigerian economy being basically agrarian means that to the extent that the food sector suffers or faces inflationary pressures, to the extent that the bulk of the population in the economy are actually affected negatively, and therefore the issues of the issue of deprivation and grievances, and so on. So these are the kind of problems that Nigeria is talking about.
Dr. Sambo, I want you to speak to the alignment between the monetary and fiscal policies that you mentioned, because now controlling the inflation rate or inflation levels is one of the key mandates of the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria. And even the IMF, the World Bank have all insisted that central bankers should stay largely hawkish, talking about increasing rates to help rein in on inflation. Let's have your thoughts on how this will influence MPC decision, the last MPC for the year.
Yeah, you see the tendency in this in the country over decades, and it has become in a culture of managing our macroeconomic and monetary policy issues, is that there's a tendency to, for instance, want to have a strong Naira position, which makes me curious, because as an import-dependent economy, I don't understand why we should be romantic about strong Naira, except to promote more imports. But be that as it may, there's also this romanticism with the policy environment with, for instance, single-digit inflation. Single-digit inflation, is it the issue, or is it the competitiveness that the economic environment that is supposed to deliver for enterprises to be able to produce and compete and make income? So there's a culture over the decades of some of the directions that are actually need to be looked at and be questioned. But on the part of the fiscal policy also, fiscal behavior, fiscal activities, if you look at to my mind, the core inflation issue is being so much de-emphasized in our discussions, and that should actually be made more visible. Why? Because that is the perennial cause of the core inflation in Nigeria. Let me explain what I mean. What we understand about that is that, look at the budgetary system. The budgets in Nigeria since the past 4 or 5 decades, the so-called oil revenues. Now, these oil revenues come essentially in foreign exchange, in dollars. But somehow we translate our budgets into Naira, what I call Nairization of the oil revenues. Now, all revenues that come in dollars are there in the reserve account, and then somehow the Central Bank of Nigeria account with the so-called equivalent of that in naira, which tantamount to simply print in naira for the budget. So the entire budget is actually inflationary because it increases money supply into the system without commensurate underlying goods or services produced. So to that extent, the entire fiscal budgets have tendency of expanding the monetary base, and therefore inflationary, and all the other issues that come around. People like to think that it is for instance, the depreciation of the naira that causes the core inflation. I think otherwise. I think it is the budgetary injection of naira from that actually creates the bedrock of the Nigerian inflationary pressure.
Dr. Sambo.
And even the foreign exchange itself is actually, foreign exchange is a commodity, and therefore with superfluous supply of naira continuously through the years, you end up with spiral inflationary pressure, which creates the core inflation. Now, it is actually not the inflation level that is even the problem. It is the comparison with our competitor nations. When you have hyperinflation that is above parity with climes, like
Dr. Sambo, I want you to, just as you land on your thoughts, and also briefly, because time is fast spent in the program, I want you to also give ways or methods that can be put in place to help rein in inflation from your perspective, because you've spoken of core inflation and currency. Briefly, in a minute, thereabout, if you can, Doctor.
Governments, in trying to implement their budgets, should, as much as possible, restrain that arises from the nairalization of all revenues. Meaning, as much as possible, you see, clever countries that are dependent on natural resources like we do, like oil, don't actually convert that revenue that comes in foreign exchange in their local currencies. If they do, it will create local inflation and therefore all the things that follow.
Okay, Doctor. Okay.
Including the loss of competitiveness of our enterprises locally because they cannot compete with other clients that have lower inflation regimes. So
Thank
the whole
you so
idea
much.
is
Thank you so much, Dr. Sambo Bello Ngawa there. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. The discussion of inflation, of course, is continuous. We will definitely bring you back in to continue on what ways we can help really rein in inflation. And hopefully when next we have you join us, it will be on to speak on a lower inflation in the country. That's why we call it a wrap for the program today. Thank you for investing your time with us on the program. You can catch up on all the updates, news updates on our social media platforms. I am Christiana Amodu Otinya. Enjoy the rest of your day.